They say that the Sorrel-Weed House is one of the most haunted places in Savannah, Georgia, which, if you've ever actually walked the streets of the city, is saying something. But this house, it doesn't start with a haunting. It starts with something far quieter, far prettier, something designed to be admired. Tall columns, brickwork so pristine it looks preserved rather than aged, a courtyard that still smells faintly of magnolia and rain. It's one of those houses where you'd expect a formal greeting at the door, with white gloves, chilled wine, maybe a string quartet in the parlor. But beneath all that chivalry, beneath the perfect architecture and carefully kept history, there's rot. You can feel it when you stand near the front steps, not decay that you can see, the kind that you can sense. You shouldn't be here, but I'm glad that you are, because this is the kind that makes you glance over your shoulder, even when you're sure no one's there. And here's where it begins to slip, because on the surface, this was a house of status, elegance, and southern prosperity. Francis Sorrel, a prominent shipping merchant, married into wealth, had political ties, and entertained officers and elites right inside these very walls. But he also kept enslaved people, dozens of them. Some accounts say more, and one of those women, Molly, has no real record, no full name, no official story, just rumors and what came next. There's a window on the second floor just above the courtyard where locals say that if you look at it from the street late at night, sometimes you'll see the shape of a woman standing there. Others say that she jumps. But before we get to that, before the blood and the bones and the stories told behind gloved hands, we have to look at what this house was built to hide. A man respected by many, a wife who died by suicide, a woman erased, a story that history tried to clean up, patch over, and paint shut just like a broken door. And that's the question that's always there, hanging like Savannah's humid air. Was it guilt that built this legend, or something much harder to explain? This is a story about elegance, power, and the cost of keeping up appearances, and what happens when those appearances crack. Because if you walk into the Sorrel-Weed House today, you can still feel it. That moment right before something falls. Francis Sorrel didn't arrive in Savannah with a scandal behind him. In fact, he arrived with the kind of background that most aspiring men of the 1800s would have envied. International connections, a knack for business, and enough wealth to ensure his name would be remembered. Born in what's now known as Haiti to a French father and a free woman of color, Francis Sorrel's life already walked a strange line between privilege and contradiction. After immigrating to the U.S., he quickly established himself in the booming world of shipping, especially the kind of shipping that involved humans. It's uncomfortable, I know, but you can't talk about Southern elegance without talking about who built it and who paid for it. Francis became a prominent merchant in Savannah, dealing in goods like cotton and rice and, yes, slaves. His personal wealth ballooned, but his reputation did too. And when he married Lucinda Moxley, heiress to a well-established Southern family, it looked like the Sorrel name was cemented for good. But Lucinda died young. Illness, they said. Her death wasn't publicized, but it was felt. And it didn't take long before Francis remarried to Matilda, Lucinda's younger sister. Now let's just stop here, because if you're hearing alarm bells, you're not alone. Even by 1800 standards, marrying your deceased wife's sister raised eyebrows. But Francis seemed undeterred. Matilda moved into the grand home on Madison Square, and life continued. On the surface, everything looked ideal. Lavish parties, prominent guests, polished appearances. The Sorrel-Weed House became a symbol of Southern refinement. but under the surface, something else had started to stir. Tensions behind closed doors, unspoken rumors, and one name whispered more often than others: Molly. There's very little that we know about her, not because she wasn't important, but because enslaved women weren't given the luxury of historical record. What we do know has survived in fragments: that she was young, that she worked in the house, and that Frances Sorrel was likely more than her master. What happened between Matilda and Molly remains unclear, but what happened after, well, that's where the Sorrel-Weed House stops being a historical landmark and starts becoming something else entirely. On April 16, 1860, Matilda Sorrel died after falling, or jumping, from a second-story balcony onto the courtyard below. It was ruled a suicide, but no note was left. No explanation was given. There was just whispers about Molly, about betrayal, about something Matilda saw that she wasn't supposed to. And then, just days later, Molly was dead too. The official cause? Also suicide. She was found hanging in the carriage house, but even that account changes depending on who's telling it. Some say that she was murdered to keep things quiet. Others say that she couldn't bear the weight of what happened. Either way, it's hard to ignore the timing. One woman dies under mysterious circumstances, and then the only other witness is suddenly gone too. It doesn't feel like coincidence. It kind of feels like a cleanup. But here's what chills me. Those deaths, Matilda and Molly's, marked the start of something the Sorrel-Weed House could never seem to shake. Not with time, not with restoration, not even with the polite distance of historical tourism. Because after that, the house started talking back. Now, we'll get into that, but first, we need to understand something deeper. The way this house was built, not just architecturally, but psychologically. Because it wasn't just about wealth, it was about control. And in a place built on secrecy, silence becomes the loudest thing in the room. After Matilda and Molly died, the Sorrel-Weed House carried on, because that's what Southern households did, especially wealthy ones. Appearances were everything. Grief wasn't exactly something that you shared with your neighbors over tea. Locked it behind shutters, and bricked it into the walls. But the thing about sealed grief is that it finds its way out eventually. Even in the years that followed, people said that the house didn't feel right. Not cursed exactly, just heavy, like something was sitting on its chest. The new owners tried to restore its image. The architecture, after all, was stunning. Greek revival with Caribbean influences. It was one of the first houses in Savannah to be declared a state landmark. On paper, it was historic, elegant, a gem, but to walk through it, that's where things start to get strange. Let's start with the basics. Cold spots in rooms with no drafts. The sound of footsteps on the staircase when no one's there. Whispers in the corners, just low enough that you can't make out the words. Doors that lock themselves, shadowy figures in mirrors. And then there's the screaming. I know, it sounds dramatic, but multiple visitors and even staff have reported hearing a woman's scream coming from the courtyard. Not once, not twice, but regularly. Some say that it echoes just before dusk. Some say that it happens when the house is at its quietest, but it's always the same. High, desperate, and sharp, as if someone's falling, and maybe she still is. There's a theory, more whispered than printed, that Matilda never left the house. Not her memory, not her voice. That her final moment in the balcony and that plunge somehow got caught in a loop. That the house replays like a record, needles stuck on grief. But she's not alone, because not long after the Sorrel-Weed House opened to the public as a museum, the basement tours began. And the basement is where people stop smiling. So let's talk about what's down there. Stone walls, narrow passages, iron rings still bolted into the brick. It doesn't take much imagination to guess what those were for. Historians believed enslaved people were kept down there during their transition between owners, hidden away until they could be sold, dehumanized, forgotten, except they weren't, because to this day, visitors report nausea, dizziness, and feeling like they're being watched. Cameras fail, batteries drain, and then there are the voices. Guttural, sad, angry, pick your adjective. They've all been used. One paranormal team claimed that they heard the name Molly, whispered through a voice recorder, clear, slow, and impossible to explain. Another swore that they saw a figure pass behind the iron gate, only to vanish when they reached it. And listen, I'm not trying to turn this into a ghost story, but I also think that it's important not to dismiss what people keep experiencing. When dozens, maybe even hundreds of unrelated visitors all report the same things, you have to ask, is it all just a suggestion? Or is the house remembering? And if it is, why now? Well, here's where it starts to twist, because in recent years, some researchers have started to ask whether the house itself is amplifying something. That maybe it's not just haunted, it's reactive. That all the trauma, the secrets, the pain soaked into the wood and brick, like water into a sponge, is still active and still responding. That's not ghost tour theatrics, by the way. That's coming from architects and preservationists who've spent real time in the house. People who don't believe in the paranormal, but still say that they felt something wrong. Not evil, not dangerous, just unsettled. And that word is what sticks with me, unsettled, because this house doesn't scream in your face. It doesn't throw chairs or slam doors. It's there, quiet, maybe too quiet, like it's waiting for you to notice what it's hiding. What brings me to the question that I've been asking myself since I've ever first read about this place is, what does a house become when it refuses to forget? Is it haunted? Or is it haunted only because that we keep refusing to look at what actually happened? So we're about to go deeper, literally, into the basement, into the psych ward rumors, and into the things you're not supposed to ask about on the official tour. This is where the story stops being about the Sorrel family, and it starts being about what was buried beneath them. By the time the Sorrel family faded from the house itself, the city around them had already started rewriting their story. Montague died in 1870. Lucinda was long gone, and their son Francis, the Confederate general, he carried on the family name, but not the legacy, not really. The house changed hands, the walls were repainted, the furniture was swapped out or sold off, and yet the story wouldn't leave. This is where things begin to shift, not with documented deaths or court records, but with whispers. Local tour guides say that it started decades ago, maybe in the 70s, maybe even earlier, when the house sat empty for just too long. Neighbors said that they'd see lights flicker at odd hours or hear footsteps where there shouldn't be anyone. And yes, maybe some of that was just Savannah being Savannah, a city that trades in ghosts the way that other places trade in gas and groceries. But the Sorrel-Weed House didn't just become infamous because it creaked or had cold spots. It became infamous because people started seeing things. People who didn't know the story. People with no reason to lie. A child pointing to a window and asking, "Who's that lady in that dark dress?" was when no one else was even in the house. A man refusing to finish a renovation job after hearing a scream he swore came from inside of the walls. Visitors collapsing on the stairs, shadows caught in mirrors. Now, we can say that all of this is a coincidence and that people who visit haunted houses are more likely to see haunted things. But I'll be honest, I've talked to people who don't believe in any of that. They don't even like the idea of it. And even they've said that this house feels different. And that's what brings us back to the part that no one can quite agree on. What's actually here? Some say it's Lucinda, or what's left of her grief. Others claim it's Matilda, or the woman they say Montague kept as a mistress. There's even whispers about enslaved souls who were brutalized here and never allowed to leave. But whatever it isn't just ghost story material. It's something older, something heavier. Because this house isn't just haunted by people. It's haunted by power. Everything that was allowed to happen behind its walls, everything that we didn't write down or refused to believe, didn't just disappear. It lingered. It pressed into the wood, into the floorboards, the air. The people always want to ask, is it really haunted? And honestly, that's the wrong question. The better question here is, what if the story we were told was the quietest version possible? What if the real horror isn't the ghost of the woman in the hallway, but the fact that she was never allowed to speak when she was alive? And that's what keeps me coming back to the Sorrel-Weed House. Not the shadowy figures or the EVP recordings, but the silence, the gaps, the way this place keeps breathing even when no one's talking. Because maybe what we're hearing isn't something supernatural. Maybe it's just the truth, refusing to stay buried. The Sorrel-Weed House is now a landmark, not because of its architecture, not anymore. Tour buses stop out front, TikToks get made by the dozens, and paranormal TV shows have set up shop here. Their cameras chasing shadows across century-old plaster, hoping for the next viral bump in the night. And they've gotten it too. The EVPs, the unexplained noises, the cold rushes of air in the sealed rooms. This place has performed again and again. Ghost hunters, ghost adventures, BuzzFeed Unsolved, you name it. And I get it. I really do. There's something magnetic about this house. The way that it photographs, the way that it looms just slightly too large for its surroundings. It's theatrical without even trying. But it also makes me wonder, why this house? Why does it still command attention? Because here's the thing that no one really talks about. This isn't the only old house in Savannah. It's not the bloodiest or the most architecturally unique. But what it is unresolved. And that's what I think that people feel when they step inside. There's something unfinished here, not just in the paranormal sense, but in the very human one. The documents don't match the rumor. The names that should be remembered are the ones that no one ever wrote down. The family legacy is clean and respectable on paper, and murky and guttural in the retelling. We're not just looking for ghosts, we're looking for what was left out. And maybe we're also trying to process what we do know. That wealth can cover horror, that power can buy silence, and that sometimes the most unsettling thing isn't what happened behind closed doors, but how easy it was for everyone else to just keep walking. And that's the part that you got to remember, because when we tell ghost stories, we pretend that they're about the past. We treat them like folklore, safe, symbolic, removed from us. But the Sorrel-Weed House doesn't let you off that easy. It's not just haunted. It's a mirror, a whisper, a question you don't want to answer out loud. It asks, if something awful happened here, and you know it did, what exactly are you doing here now? Is it curiosity? Is it reverence? Or is it just the newest set of eyes staring through the glass, waiting to see something, without ever having to reckon with the why? Well, that's why this house endures, because it doesn't just give you an ending. It just waits, silent, watching. And in a city that feeds off ghost stories, the Sorrel-Weed House isn't a story, it's a presence. But remember, if this is a presence you're wanting to feel for yourself, make sure you let me know, because I can help you get there. I'm a travel advisor, history nerd, and mystery chaser, and I'm here to take you to the places that you didn't even know existed.